I'm honored to be joined today by Brian Zahnd, ragamuffin, rocker, dissident preacher, lauded prophet, and proclaimer of the good news, and author of such critically lauded books as Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God, The Scandalous Truth of the Very Good News, and his latest, The Wood Between the Worlds, a poetic theology of the cross. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Randall. What a generous introduction.
Well, it's great to have you. So I was just sharing with you right before we started recording. I was hoping to do these two interviews, maybe about 20 minutes each. And in the first one, I would like to talk a little bit about the current state of the North American or American church, evangelicalism in particular. And we're coming right now a week from what has been, I think, one of the most divisive election seasons in recent memory. Some are saying
Yeah.
going back to the 1860s, to be honest. And we're just coming up to that. And I want to begin then with a reference to a Philip Yancey story that he told years ago. So back in What's So Amazing About Grace, he talked about how he would often go up to people and say, what's the first word that you think of when you hear the word evangelical? And he would say, well, people would say anti-abortion or against gay people or something. What they never said was grace. It was always being against certain things.
Yeah.
It seems to me that we're in an even more polarized time now. So I'm going to kind of just throw it open. Want to hear your thoughts on where you think the church is at.
Wow, there's a lot to say here. I will speak to the evangelical church. Let me say it this way. If my words are harsh, it's because I come from that world. Now, when I say I come from that world, actually, there's never been a time in my life when I've self-identified as an evangelical. Uh, I come from the Jesus movement. That kind of brought me into the charismatic movement. The charismatic movement wasn't really part of evangelicalism. At least we didn't think so. We thought that those are Baptists, and we're not Baptists. But culture wars drove everybody under the same tent. So, if in fact I have lived my whole life and done my work of ministry among evangelicals, then I'm speaking within the family. So, if my words are harsh, but I think we've reached the point where I would describe evangelicalism in America as a failed experiment. And I'm not sure why it has failed. I mean, I have some ideas. But if you ask people today what the word evangelical means, I think it has purely a political connotation. Evangelicalism is the de facto religious wing of the Republican Party. It is in service to Republican politics, whether they understand it or not. I think many of them actually do understand it and they're fine with that. Others don't really see that that's what's happened, but it is what's happened. And so, a movement that was supposed to be known for an emphasis on the good news, the gospel, the evangel, and maybe an emphasis on what we would call a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, an emphasis on the role of Scripture in the life of the believer, really has all of that is more or less tangential to what is central, and that is furthering the cause of a particular political party in the American contemporary moment that we're passing through. And I just see that as very sad. I think, come on, people, you're better than this. At least I think you are. I can look back with some of my Jesus movement compatriots. I was a leader in the Jesus movement, but about as young as you could be. I was like 16, 17. I know that sounds ridiculous that you could be a leader, but I was, in fact. And so most of them were 10 years older than me or something like that. And so I'm 65, so they're in their 70s now. And I'm just going to speak frankly. I mean, I just see so many of them that went from this radical, on fire for Jesus, largely informed by things like the Sermon on the Mount, to just, a MAGA Christian heralding the virtues of Donald Trump. I just think, come on, we didn't, this is not what we were about. What has happened? And I think I don't want to do an analysis because that's not really, I'm not a sociologist, but I did live through it. And I can remember, well, let me back up. I come from a very political family. My father, at one time, he was a judge, but before he was a judge, he was very politically involved. One time was whatever the title is, the head of the Missouri Republicans. My brother also very involved in politics. He's the prosecutor in North Kansas City. Um, and I just grew up in, I mean, one of my earliest memories was going with my father to the courthouse on election night because, before internet and cable news, if you really wanted to know what was happening as soon as possible, you would go to the courthouse and the election returns are coming in. So being a small child, I remember that. And so I grew up in that world. But there was always a knowledge, at least within my household, that it is a toxic world, that you have to be careful about it, that it's a necessary world, but it doesn't give itself to be noble. It gives itself towards, I mean, whoever said it, Lord Acton, I thought for years that my father had coined the axiom, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, because he said it all the time in context of politics. So I grew up with not a naive view of politics. But I think around 1980, when evangelicals through on the more fundamentalist side, Jerry Falwell, on the more charismatic side, Pat Robertson, began to enter the political world, they did so with a stunning naivete. And that they really did see this as some sort of virtuous good versus evil, where the lines were just completely clearly dividing the good and righteous Republicans and the evil Satan worshiping Democrats. And that's how they entered that political realm, and they've kind of stayed that way. They've never, but over the period, they're no longer naive babes in the woods. Now the movement seems to have been corrupted, and it carries that kind of vileness. I'm using strong language here, but I do it from a broken heart. I mean that, Randall, from a broken heart. I mean, I grieve about this. I pray about it every day. I think about it till I'm tired of thinking about it. I wish I didn't think about it as much as I do, but I don't know that evangelicalism recovers from this. I mean, it'll continue to exist as a movement. I think it's going to be harder and harder to have young people, but I don't know that there's recovery. I think there are some, the Church of Jesus Christ will endure upon this rock. Jesus says, I'll build my church, the gates of Hades won't prevail. But particular movements can fail and be, you know, unretrievable. And I think that may be where we're at least spiritually. It'll still exist as a movement, but I don't know how it has a movement-wide reckoning with this level of betrayal to the cause of Christ. I don't know who's going to hear this, and I know the language is strong, and I use this kind of language when I'm like a podcast, which I feel like we're kind of sitting in a living room. I don't get up on Sunday morning and talk like this at all.
I'm scheduled to do a debate in a couple days, and the debate topic that was presented to me is, can you be a Christian and vote for Kamala Harris? I'm going to argue yes, but I was a little taken aback even by this as a debate resolution. And I think it just shows something of the degree of polarization we're in.
Yeah,
Now, I'm going to anticipate, and I don't know, but I'm going to anticipate that my interlocutor in the debate, one of the things he will talk about is abortion, a culture of life, and
yeah.
maybe a lot of people talk about is single issue voting. What
Hmm.
would be your response to people who says you have to support the Republicans? That just has to be the party of the Christian because it's the more pro-life party.
It's the more anti-abortion party. I wouldn't say it's the more pro-life party. Uh, I mean, life is more than just being anti-abortion. Now, Christians from as far back as the Didache, this first or second century document that kind of helped govern churches, Christians have said from the beginning that abortion is incompatible with Christian ethics. I concur with that. Amen. I agree. My whole question is to what degree do we seek to involve the apparatus of the state in this issue? I think we should make disciples of Christ in such a way that they see that abortion is, in general, there are exceptions, I think, but I mean, in general, abortion is incompatible with Christian ethics. This is nothing new. We've always said this. But does that mean that we are determined to use the apparatus of the state toward that end, to legislate this? I mean, I understand there can be arguments for that, but I want them done in good faith. and not just as a covering for many other agendas that they're equally or more passionate about, such as, being anti-immigrant or other things like that, which that's not a pro-life stance. That's just their stance that they've adopted, and then they use pro-life as a covering for that. So um, that's kind of how I feel about that.
So you said that there's a difference between being anti-abortion and being pro-life. And I hear this often
I mean,
from,
pro-life and pro-gun, those don't go together. Pro-life and
yeah,
pro-death penalty, those don't go together. Pro-life and pro-militarism, those don't go together. I mean, the early church was pro-life. I mean, you can read the church fathers. Yes, they were against abortion and the death penalty and war and whatever else I failed to mention. Yeah, that would be consistent.
and pro-refugee, let's say.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, so you said the question then is, to what degree should the state be involved? Can a person be pro-life and say, but as a personal conviction, that doesn't mean that I should be voting for people who would seek greater regulations on access to abortion?
Sure, they have people can absolutely think that way and vote that way, and people do. I don't know that it should be a position of the church per se. I I'm a little bit radical in this. There's a little bit of an Anabaptist strain in me. I'm not Anabaptist, like, I don't belong, but there is a strong strain of that in me, that the church doesn't need to involve itself in the affairs of the governing of this world. That it's so altogether different that there's never going to be a very easy, compatible, harmonious relationship between the governments of this world and the kingdom of Christ. And if we try to find some sort of merging, then what we end up with is a very, very compromised Christianity, which is Christendom. And sometimes Christendom can take on awful forms. That doesn't mean that we don't have a role as a prophetic witness, as salt, light, influence. But as far as direct participation in the process, I think we should involve ourselves in that very cautiously, with eyes wide open, understanding that the potential for corruption is enormous. When I say corruption, I mean once we start pursuing power, then we seem to step into a realm where the ends justify the means. And so we have our ends, we're going to get we have to control the House, we have to control the Senate, we got to get more justice on the Supreme Court, and so we can speak with vitriol, we can demonize our enemies because of our noble cause. I would say that a Christian ethic regarding means and cause would be more like this: the means are the end in the process of becoming. And so if the means are dishonest, if the means are demeaning, if the means are cruel, then that's what the end is going to be.
To talk a little bit more about the balancing act in terms of kingdom and out of this world, and yet the mustard seed is growing in the midst of history. And in particular, with churches taking stances on various hot button issues of the day. So, for example, in my denomination, in our region, 14 years ago, there was an addition to the statement of belief that also a traditional affirmation of sorry, not a gay marriage, of heterosexual marriage that would offer pastors an out so that they could say we don't perform gay marriages within this denomination, because it was legalized in Canada back in 2005. And my concern there is, okay, once you start adding things onto our core confessional statements,
Yeah.
where do you stop? On the other hand, then I'm also thinking, well, if I'm a church in South Africa in the late 1980s, should we not have a statement against apartheid? If I'm a German confessing church in the 1930s, should I not have been part of the Barmen Declaration? How do you find that balancing act of where to take a stand on the sociocultural
Yeah.
issues of the day?
Look, Randall, whenever I speak on political theology, I'm never satisfied with what I say or even write. Writing can be much more precise, but still, I'm never satisfied. And so, whatever I say in terms of political theology, there's always this caveat of, yeah, but I don't. So, I tell people, if you hear me say something in the realm of political theology and disagree with me, there's a very good chance I disagree with me too. I just haven't found a better way to say it. I think the reason that political theology is so difficult is that the New Testament has no vision for Christians holding political power. So we're left to make it up as we go. It's just not anticipated at all. And so that creates a problem. There are some notable examples of Christians to some extent participating in the political process for a cause, civil rights, South Africa, Wilberforce. There's these examples. And I would say, yeah, there are those moments when we truly are, leaven hidden in three lumps of dough or whatever. But more often, I'm worried about, an American version of a German Christian movement circa 1934. So that part of me is what that instills a lot of caution. And I don't know. I think I've been able to maintain a voice for justice without being directly involved in the political process. And then I'll say also this: the church that I pastor now 43 years. I hear myself say that and think, man, 43 years, one congregation, 43 years, and we're a non-denominational church, which I say I don't even believe in. But you just had to be. It just happened. It just happened. The Jesus movement. I was actually leading a coffee house ministry at the age of 17 that turned into a church by the time I was 22. So, but really, I'd already been leading effectively what was a church since I was 17. So I tell people, look, I've been a pastor longer than I've been an adult, which is just comical. I mean, I'm not recommending it. It's just part of the story. So we're non-denominational, which I don't recommend. But it's what happened. And I've always been a little bit embarrassed about that. I tried to atone for it by being very deeply, intentionally ecumenical. And I really am. I mean, I get invited to speak to Orthodox, Catholics, Anglicans, on and on. Anabaptists ask me to come and speak to them and remind them of what they're supposed to believe about war and violence and things like that. But lately, there has been a good side of being non-denominational, and that is we have not been drugged into denominational fights. And so Word of Life here in St. Joseph, Missouri, we just don't have policies on these sorts of things. And we've been able to work it through. Now, I know partisan people that have strong opinions on both sides of some of these human sexuality issues are vehemently going to disagree with me. Okay, maybe I disagree with me too, but I'm just telling you what's happened. We have the whole range of what people I think in basic would think about issues regarding human sexuality in our congregation, and yet it's not an issue. We have plenty of people in leadership, gay, etc. And we have plenty of people that probably think the whole thing's a sin, and yet in the local church context, when it's people they know, they're okay. And so it's the only time it ever becomes an issue is when outsiders try to force me to make statements. But I've never had anyone in our church. It's a fairly large church and people have access to me. I see them all the time. I've never had anybody put pressure on me to make a public statement one way or the other. We're just busy loving one another. I know this sounds real pious, but it's true. Loving one another, trying to proclaim the good news of Jesus, and giving one another a lot of grace, and not forcing our entire congregation to come to one single point of agreement on some of these very difficult issues.
Questions before we wrap. The first one is, let's say that there's a person listening who is going to an evangelical church that is checking a lot of the boxes that we've been talking about. Highly hyper-partisan, pro-Republican, everybody assumes you vote for Donald Trump, a very truncated understanding of what a gospel of life is, really almost limiting it to in utero. At what point does that person say, I don't belong here anymore? I need to find a healthier congregation?
I talk with these people. I mean, this is not a theoretical question for me.
Mm.
I talk to these people constantly. That's a lot of people that actually end up at our church, online and in person. As a pastor of one congregation for 43 years, I am loath to suggest to somebody that they move on from the church. And I'm not wired that way. I don't think that way. I've got too much Eugene Peterson in me to think that way. Uh, but we seem to be at a crisis moment. And look, and I can say the other side too. I can say if Sunday morning after Sunday morning after Sunday morning is nothing more than kind of a religious version of Fox News or CNBC, I can understand you saying, I need something other than this. I need something other. And but that might be my counsel is try to find something that's truly other, not just the other side. Um, it's interesting when I advocate for a position of what I would maybe describe as passionate ambivalence toward the political process. If I do that on a social media circle, I'll get a lot of pushback, but I can't tell from which side it is unless I look at their profile. Now, if I look at the profile, it takes me 10 seconds. Okay, this is coming from the left. Oh, this is coming from the right. But they both push back in kind of the same way. And I think Rene Girard would describe this as these two sides are locked in a mimesis. They're imitating one another now.
Mm.
They're convinced that they're radically different, but they're actually mirroring one another. And Girard will tell you this is where wars come from. So that's part of what's scary. But I can't remember what the question was. I think I lost the thread there somewhere.
Well, I think you answered it. So the question was, what would you say to that person? And you'd
Oh,
say
well, then I would
they have to
say,
move on. But
yeah, then I would say, don't just go find the opposite.
yeah,
Try to find a place that, I mean, this is again, it's like idealistic language, though, that is above the fray, that is emphasizing the gospel, that really is talking about Jesus in a serious way and not trying to use Jesus as a mascot to endorse one political side or another. I mean, I think once you start feeling that way regularly, probably something needs to happen.
mm. Well,
Or not. Or if you can stay and love these people and say, okay, I'm going to get my soul's going to be nourished from some other source because we have access to everything now. I also can say if you can stay and love your friends and walk with them through this, that's noble and God, if you can. But I think but not everybody can, and I understand that.
sure. Totally changing streams now. So I follow you on Twitter.
Good. I'm
Yeah,
ready to change streams,
yeah.
brother.
I see how culturally aware you are, engaged, music tastes, film, all over the place, books. Here's a question for you. If you could go back in time
Hmm.
to a historical musical concert, it could be
Man.
Elton John playing LA in 85 or 75. It could be Live Aid in 85. It could be Woodstock or something else, something that you weren't there, but you wish you had been, or
Yeah.
you could go there. What would it be?
Well, Randall, I think about things like this. I believe me, in my imagination, I have a time machine,
Hmm.
and I just realized the other day in a conversation with my wife, my time machine never goes to the future. I'm not interested in the future. I'm always going to the past.
Hmm.
I don't know exactly. Here's what I've thought. If I would love to go back to 1975 and catch Dylan Rolling Thunder Review and the Stones on tour and Zeppelin, especially Zeppelin. Uh, so I don't know which of those three, but I would my time machine. I'm going to go back for about 6 months, and I'm just going to go to shows. But that would be the era.
Maybe a little bit of disco as well.
Yeah. Disco's about a year or two later. So once disco hits, I'm getting back in the time machine. Getting back.
Okay, fair enough. I actually I saw Robert Plant and Alison Krauss this
Yeah,
summer
yeah.
up at Folk Fest here in Edmonton. So it was great.
I've
Not
seen
quite
Robert Plant.
Zeppelin, but yeah, they're
I was
good.
too young to have ever seen them. Well, I wasn't so much too young as they, by the time I was old enough to go to shows, they never came to Kansas City again. They would go to St. Louis, but still I was like 15 and I don't, my parents weren't letting me gonna go 250 miles to go see Led Zeppelin.
Well, I'll say this. I think you picked a good year. 75 is a good year. And I was too, so you could have brought me. But
Yeah, yeah.
Brian, it's been
I was
great.
I was 16, so
Yeah, well, that is a golden age. So
yeah.
thank you very much. It's been great. We're gonna continue that chat in part two. But thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.